Good afternoon, everyone. When I bring you into the room, we are live on social media and on the news, so keep that in mind.
Well, Rich, I can see you. Can you hear me? Well, I guess I can't hear you.
There. No, it was me.
Oh, okay.
I had left it on mute. Sorry about that. How you doing?
Good. I'm healing well.
Good. Yeah. Good time to stay at home.
Yes, it is.
There, I can see you now.
Okay.
Jake.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
Hey, guys.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Jake.
Good afternoon.
Looks like we've got everybody in attendance as far as our planning commission members are concerned, so we can start the meeting anytime. I'll call the meeting to order. By way of roll call, we have Mr. Klecker, Mr. Spiker, Mr. Chimeni, and Mr. Wazorek here present. We do have one vacancy on the planning commission at this point, which will be filled. We also have Ms. Burlingham here, who is one of our alternates. We do have a quorum. Next up on the agenda is election of 2021 Planning Commission officers. So we'll do nominations for chair and vice chair. And for secretary, I will continue to serve as secretary if that pleases the commission.
You got my vote.
Yep.
Make it 3.
Thank you. First up, do we have any nominations for chair?
I mean, I'll do it again.
And I'll be happy to nominate him.
I second Mark.
Okay, we have a first and a second nominating Mark as chair. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Approved. Nominations for vice chair.
Richard.
Yeah, okay, I'll second that.
We have a nomination for Mr. Spiker, at first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Thank you. Next up on the agenda, and just as a point of reference, the chair certainly always has the floor as far as coordinating any other comments or anything like that. So Mark, by all means, you always kind of have the floor open to you.
All right.
I guess as we've been doing, I've typically run through the agenda items and then opened it up. Next up on the agenda, we have approval of the December 15th, 2020 meeting minutes of the City Planning Commission. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to take a look at them, review them. Do you have any questions or comments or edits on the minutes? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Minutes are approved. Next up on the agenda, we have the active Erie plan. We previously sent out a link to the website that has all the plan information on it. So hopefully everybody get a chance to look at that. I'm going to turn the floor over to Kathy. She can describe that. And I believe we're also going to have a presentation shared on the screen with the consultants involved with the project. Kathy, it's all yours.
Thanks. Thanks, Jake. We had a little problem getting Jeff in, but I see he's on board now, so we're all in. The Active Erie plan you've seen before early on in its stages. It is the city's bike ped plan, comprehensive citywide bike ped plan that was launched back in October of 2019. Am I saying that right? Yeah. It's amazing how time flies, because before it, October 2019 was a very different world for us when we undertook this process. But we knew we needed, the city wanted to identify ways in which they started prioritizing building out a bike and pedestrian network that met the needs of the community at large, met the needs of the residents. But we also, we gave the WNRNA as our consultant team that was brought in to help us, and Jeff Rigner is on the line. Leah Kinkata was also one of our consultants. There's Jeff. They've been with us from the very beginning. We also gave them the charge that, you know, this has to be reasonable. It has to be aspirational and yet achievable, given the limitations that we know we have in the city of Erie, from a funding standpoint, from a resource standpoint. But we also have a lot of opportunities to make how we get in and get around our city. We have a lot of opportunities to make it better. So that was essentially the charge that we gave WRNA. And I don't want to rehash what Jeff's going to go over, but where we're at now is the tail end of the process. We've had to pivot, as everyone had to do when COVID hit. We had to take on a completely different way of community engagement, and I think we got very creative and did a yeoman's job getting the feedback and the input from the residents that were so vital to making this plan a success. So I really appreciate the work that WRNA and Jeff and Leah have done. It really resonated with our steering committee, which he'll go over that with you. And I apologize. I did everything preparing for this meeting except write the resolution that should go along with this plan. So you got that last minute, but hopefully it's pretty straightforward. And if you like what you see, you'll recommend it to City Council, and City Council will see it at their next available meeting. So with that, I know we've got a big agenda for you, so I just turn it over to Jeff.
Kathy, is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes.
We can.
Great.
Yes.
So thanks for the opportunity to see you again. It's been a real pleasure working with the city and other members of the steering committee on this plan. We'll give you a brief overview. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at the plan that's available on the project website, activeerie.com. What I'm really going to focus on today is giving you a brief overview of the contents of the plan and focusing really on its recommendations and how it can be implemented, because that's a real place where the Planning Commission can play an important role. So the plan is organized into a number of sections. We provide an introduction, a lot of information about existing conditions, including several prior studies related to active transportation or walking and biking within the city. We did a complete inventory, both the consultant team working with a number of city staff, developed an inventory of existing facilities for walking and bicycling, all sidewalks, all bike facilities, trails, painted bike lanes, what have you. Kathy introduced very briefly public engagement, which we've discussed with you before. The only action that took place after the last time we talked to you was a mobile workshop. A number of members of the project team, including the mayor, had an opportunity to bike all the way across the city to 6 different sites in different neighborhoods of the community to share the initial recommendations of the plan, to get comments, and really to understand the routes that are being proposed as bikeways as part of the plan. So it was a really exceptional opportunity to learn more detail about these routes. And I think everyone, regardless of whether they're a visitor to the city as I was, or someone who's lived there their whole life, saw something new as part of that tour, and it was really well received. I'll talk mostly about our recommendations and implementation, and there's also an appendix, which is a bicycle facility selection guide that allows city staff to be able to use a process to determine what type of bikeway is appropriate on which street. So start with biking first, and then walking, and then general policy recommendations. So what we've proposed, the team has proposed, is a low-stress bikeway network. It's a grid of bikeways going across the city, both east-west and north-south. Kathy talked about our organizing principle, which is that this plan should be aspirational, but realistic. If we were talking about building bridges over every street and costing hundreds of millions of dollars, we know it's not something that the city could implement. But likewise, we're not just taking on the low-hanging fruit. The goal was to create a number of opportunities using existing low-stress streets, which are the ones that will be in teal on the map I'll show you next. They are going to rely mostly on signs and pavement markings to provide a safe and comfortable bikeway for most people. So that should accommodate all adults, even those who are not especially comfortable riding bikes, as well as many kids who are more comfortable riding bikes. So there will be some more significant investments though, and those are the ones that are shown in that pink color. Those are bikeways that require more significant construction. And then in addition to that grid, which I'll show you in a second, there are a number of local connections to schools, local shopping areas, other destinations that are not quite on the grid, again, using existing low-stress streets to make those connections. So this shows you what the overall grid looks like. You're welcome to delve into it in much more detail in the plan. But even at this scale that shows the city on a small screen, you can see how that grid works. Most of the routes, West 6th Street, 10th Street, a grouping of 19th, 21st, and Fairmont Parkway across the middle of the city, as well as a grouping of 28th, 29th, and 32nd Street, are all using existing lower stress streets, meaning there's not much traffic, relatively low speeds. There are some circumstances where those routes cross more major streets, where we'll need to look more closely at flashing beacons, traffic signals, or other types of traffic control to allow people to cross more safely. And you can also see some of the north-south streets fall into that category. Pittsburgh, part of Green Garden, Cascade Street, what we're calling East Avenue, which is mostly on East Avenue, but also uses part of the existing Bayfront Bikeway, as well as Dowling Avenue and Bird Drive to the eastern part of the city. But there are some projects that will require more significant investment. 38th Street is the one that came up most often through our public outreach and survey. We got hundreds of responses to the survey, so it's pretty good picture of what citizens of Erie are looking for. We heard a lot about 38th Street, and in fact, the county and city are initiating work on the first segment of 38th to better understand how all modes of travel can be accommodated. That's also true on French Street, where a large portion, at least as far south as 28th Street, would include a two-way cycle track, which is separate from motor vehicle traffic, as well as East 6th Street and East Lake Road, which are not wide enough to simply restripe as bike lanes. So our goal is to get most of the network done, to allow the city to get most of the network done using signs and pavement markings and making strategic, larger investments in certain specific projects. It also does address State Street. State Street is not going to be made a so-called low-stress route because of the amount of motor vehicle traffic and turning movements and pedestrians and such along State Street. But our plan does wholeheartedly endorse the Downtown Streetscape Master Plan, which proposed the section you see here, which is bike lanes and buffers adjacent to on-street parking and providing better environment for pedestrians. Now, the pedestrian side is also just as important, but it's less of a vision for the city because the city already has sidewalks along 95% plus of its streets. But we do know that some gaps exist, and those are noted in the report. And there's also an issue in terms of sidewalk repair. The city's current code, as we understand it, requires property owners to maintain their sidewalks in good condition. There are many parts of the city where that is feasible for property owners. There are many parts where it is not feasible. And so what we recommend as part of this plan is a sidewalk completion and repair program. So we would suggest that the city evaluate sidewalk repair requirements to see if there's some way that there might be participation at a public level in addition to a property owner level. Update the city's transition plan that was developed in 2013 for compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as to create an annual capital program, which would not only work on filling in sidewalk gaps throughout Erie, but is also general planning best practice. City doesn't currently have a CIP, and that would be a very valuable tool toward implementing a number of the recommendations of this plan and other plans developed by the city. Now, we have a lot of recommendations, 2 slides worth on policies, procedures, and programs. I don't have to tell this group, but I do tell the public, this is not the fancy pictures and nice graphics and everything, but this is how city government gets its work done, right? Is establishing policies and procedures and following them. So we have a number of recommendations. In addition to the adoption of this plan, we recommend finalizing and adopting a complete streets policy, which makes sure that all capital programs, all developer projects are aligned toward creating streets that work for all users. We recommend establishing the 5-year CIP for the city, which will have benefits beyond active transportation. We recommend using a level of traffic stress method to evaluate bicycle facilities. In simple terms, that's making sure streets are comfortable for most everybody, regardless of how they travel. This group, of course, would play a key role in updates to the zoning ordinance and the subdivision and land development ordinance to address specific elements of multimodal travel. We recommend establishing requirements for maintaining walking and bicycling traffic during construction. How many of us have seen while driving along adjacent to a construction site that the sign that says use caution blocks the entire sidewalk? And providing standards and guidance for people to make sure that that traffic is maintained for walking and bicycling is really important. We recommend publishing crash data on walking and bicycling to gauge the city's progress, adopting a citywide Safe Routes to School program, seeking status as a walk-friendly or bike-friendly community. This is a national program administered by Walk America and by the League of American Bicyclists to recognize their communities for what they're doing. And even if you're not successful getting designation at first, they'll give very useful information saying, here are some of the steps that you can take to gain that status. So that's something I'd recommend doing every couple of years just to make sure that you understand where you stand. And then a couple others, establishing lighting guidelines, because city gets more citizen requests than they can handle on a regular basis, but providing guidelines allows them to be able to respond to those in an equitable manner. Evaluating intersections on State Street and other very high pedestrian locations for no turn on red restrictions and for what are called leading pedestrian intervals. So the walk sign comes on, or signal comes on 3 to 5 seconds before the green so that pedestrians can establish themselves in the intersection and be more visible to drivers. And then finally, continue the great work that you're doing in integrating transportation with a lot of the arts-based programming that's happening in the city now to foster community support for these types of improvements.
I would add there too, Jeff, the Planning Commission hasn't been that involved yet in the initiative that you're more familiar with. We're going to be partnering with Erie Arts and Culture with their Creating with Community Artists in Residence program, where they're going to have 12 artists in residence working directly with our Public Works Department engineering in helping to build out one of the corridors in the city. So it's a team of artists working directly with our engineering and our streets department to build out the 19th Street corridor, which you'll see Jeff go over that a little bit more. Erie Arts and Culture, they are on our steering committee for the plan. And so Patrick, when he went for his next round, wanted to offer support, and that's how he offered support. So this should be an exciting new venture. We'll see how it goes. I think it'll be great for everyone involved. And then our local artist, Tom Ferraro, who you might recognize that name on this call, will be the project manager for those artists. So very exciting. So sorry about that, Jeff. I just want to bring the Planning Commission up to speed on that project.
No, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Kathy, because that ties directly into the implementation stage. Kathy will be the first to tell you that a plan that doesn't turn into implementation is not a useful plan at all. So we've tried to lay out an initial roadmap for the city to turn these recommendations into reality. So there are staged implementation steps throughout the plan, with action starting pretty much right away upon adoption of the plan. Our suggestion, in addition to the policy and program work, is that some physical construction should start early. It should begin with an easier project along an existing low-stress street. So the teal ones that you saw on the map are good ones. 19th Street is an excellent example of something that could work well. But the selection of that project and how it's implemented should be done in close consultation with the community. This is a citywide plan. We had excellent public input from a citywide perspective, but because it's citywide, we weren't able to delve into individual neighborhoods or individual corridors in great detail. And so the recommendations are by necessity general in nature. So by all means, when working to select one of these teal lines to implement first, work closely with the community, understand their needs and their desires, and develop a plan that works well for them. And the plan is structured to allow for completion somewhere on the order of a 10 to 12 year timeframe. The big issue, of course, is funding for all these types of things, especially the pink lines on the map, which represent more of a capital investment. But the plan is structured to be implemented bit by bit, gradually creating a broader network to cover the whole city. And with that, our next step is to finalize our discussions with you and then present the final draft to City Council for review and adoption. We're intending at this point to do that at their meeting on February 3rd. So that's a broad overview. I'm happy to answer any questions any of the commission members may have.
No questions. It's a lot to take to sort of absorb. If you haven't had a chance, I certainly encourage everyone to go to the Active Erie website. And I think that low traffic stress model just really resonated with us because, Jeff and Leah were able to identify those corridors that are fairly easy to manage now. And if we could just have some really specific directional signage, wayfinding signage, some markers, maybe some and things like that, look at some sidewalk improvements. It makes a lot, something that's very, very tangible for this city to undertake. And yet we have those 4 or 5 more aspirational projects. That means we're gonna have to write grants and dedicate some capital funding to making those specific corridors or the connections, which is what happens on 19th Street, happen. And so 4 or 5, again, seems pretty reasonable that we can start lining some grant funding up to make those kinds of improvements work. So I certainly appreciate everyone's time today, but most importantly, the time that's been dedicated by the steering committee and the staff and Jeff and Leah to make this plan happen over what was quite a year. So we're glad we're at the tail. And like Jeff said, you'll see more of this as we start talking about 5-year capital improvement plans, and that this will be just one component of, and we'll start diving into the saldo in a number of different areas. So you'll see this in a couple of different ways coming back in front of you.
Can I just ask one question, Kathy?
Yep.
I just glanced at the website, so perhaps there's information there, but I just want to ensure for Erie City Moms, for the grassroots organization that I manage, you know, one of the priorities that we have is ensuring walkability, and you address this back and forth to schools, and of course walkability for parents with their kids. Now, some of the bikeways that you talked about sounded like they were going to be rideable for older kids and adults with some skill level. You know, can you just talk about, as far as the organizations that are on the steering committee, how they represent maybe what group of people that they represent? And
sure.
and also, I think the other thing I was looking for is just the surveys that came back, if you have any demographic information for the surveys.
I'm not sure about the demographic information on the surveys. I can look into that. The steering committee is representatives from, we looked at all of the transportation related agencies that would impact or have or need to be on the provide information and feedback to the city. So we have the MPO, PennDOT, the City of Erie, traffic engineer, engineering, zoning. Of course, we're all on there. I was on there. School district was there from their safe routes to schools specifically was a target. Randy Persnickety, I can't say his last name, Persnickety or whatever it is, with the school district. He's been a great advocate. We had Erie Arts and Culture, and we also had the Disability Action Roundtable. So we had the people with disabilities represented as well. So there was a lot of feedback from there, and also Bike Erie. And I see some of our Bike Erie steering committee members are attending today. I could see them in the attendee list. So those are essentially who were at the table. I don't think I'm forgetting anyone.
We had the Erie Community Foundation. We had the county planning, county department of public health.
Thank you. Yeah.
We had representation from the Multicultural Community Resource Center. So pretty broad cross section of organizations across the city.
Yep. Okay. You waved us on. You're muted.
So as far as the demographic of people that were surveyed, we're not sure about exactly any background information about where those surveys came back from. I just want to ensure that that there was representation for all of the demographics of walkers, I guess specifically that I see, that are primarily on the Lower East Side or even in the Donut Hole.
Well, I have to say,
I'm sorry, to Bayfront area.
So Amanda, I will say that as we were going through the survey process, we were getting a lot of pings from let's call them the nicer neighborhoods, even Mill Creek, because anyone could take the survey, and people who live in Mill Creek work in downtown. So they were providing a lot of feedback. We were a little disappointed because we weren't able to do the outreach that we had intended, which was going to be door to door, sort of going into these fairs, festivals. We had it all planned out beautifully. We were going to go where people were, because we know that's the best way to reach a lot of the demographics, but we weren't able to do that because of COVID. So one of the things the two things that we tried to circumvent or to help with that is we put table tents down at the library. So people who were at the computers using the library could log on to the survey, or if they were sitting there reading a book, they got the QR code and they could go to the survey. And then the mobile workshop was specifically designed to try to meet people where they were. So we started at Frontier, we went up to 19th Street, went all the way over to 19th Street to McClellan Park eventually, and then down East Avenue, stopped at East Middle School, and then over to the library was sort of the route. We stopped 6 times. It was live streamed, and then there's a video on site. So there were about 3,000 people who eventually watched the videos of that day. There was no way to capture necessarily who those people were. So it was just our attempt, Amanda. I don't know how else to do it with COVID.
Yeah,
We were all, but that was our attempt. I would say that we probably did get lower feedback than we had wanted from the people who are probably use this mode of transportation the most, which is walking and biking. So I don't know how to counteract that. One of the other ways that we see will assist is that artists in residence. There's going to be 6 teams across 19th Street corridor, which will hit Parade Commons, which will hit the Passive House development, which will hit the Spoons, in that area, Spoons, and also Little Italy. So they're going to have to work with the community to design out that corridor. So it's not a perfect situation, but I just want to make sure you knew we were very cognizant, and Jeff will know I was just mad as I was mad because I was like, I don't know how to fix this. This darn COVID is just destroying everything. And so we tried to pivot and make it worthwhile. So I hope we've achieved it is my hope.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Kathy. And thanks for your hard work and trying to capture that audience.
Thanks. And I think that concludes it, unless anyone has any other questions. There is a resolution. Again, you got it last minute. If you want to take a moment to review it. I apologize again for the last minute. If you want to wait until the end of the meeting, whatever you want to do, it's kind of just an add-on for today. If you see anything that you don't like about it, now would be the time to tell me.
Kathy, this is Armand. Are there any other cities that have gone through this or are going through it at the moment? A resolution like this?
Well, there's plenty of cities who have created citywide bike plans, for sure. Jeff could probably tell you, how many cities have you worked with in the past couple of years, Jeff, to create a bike plan like this?
To dozens, and there are literally thousands of communities across the country that have done this. I would say buy-in from organizations like the Planning Commission and of course by City Council is really critical to give something like this teeth. One of the most important things that Erie could do to make this happen is to have an adopted plan to give to PennDOT. When PennDOT advances projects in the city, they need to follow a process called PennDOT Connects, where they look at all of the cities and counties planning documents and do their best to align their project with the goals of the city. Not having a plan in place really has hampered some communities around the state, in that PennDOT can, I don't want to say they do exactly what they want, but there's less teeth from the local perspective to be able to shape projects in the way that the city wants to see them. And having this plan in place is going to be a very valuable tool as PennDOT advances projects in the future, making sure the city gets their voice heard. And other cities like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Lancaster have definitely benefited from doing just that.
Okay, I was just curious about the feedback that you might have gotten from other cities.
Yeah, we're just as an example, we're doing active work in Lancaster right now. And the city's active transportation plan has been a critical tool, not just toward shaping PennDOT investments, but gaining PennDOT funding for implementation activities. Like, for example, they're doing a bicycle and pedestrian count program now that we're assisting them with. It's fully PennDOT funded.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff, are there different accommodations that you're making in lower income neighborhoods that are higher pedestrian versus what you're making in moderate to high income neighborhoods. Is that something that you're seeing that's happening in different communities that you're working in?
What I'm seeing more in terms of transportation equity is not designing to a different standard, but more prioritizing two things in traditionally underserved communities. Number one, that projects tend to go there first because there's been a history of disinvestment there. And number two, and this may even be more important, is direct coordination and involvement of people in the community in shaping the course of the project.
Mm-hmm.
So the days of doing things to underrepresented communities or such should be over. It should be an opportunity to partner with those communities and city government to make things happen that work well for the community. So the design standard is no different. The design standard's high everywhere. People should feel safe walking or biking from their street, no matter where they live, once this plan's fully implemented. But we do think it makes a lot of sense to invest in communities where that investment hasn't occurred over the last several decades.
Thank you.
So Jake, our job here is we've got on our agenda to we need to recommend this to city council, correct?
Yes, that's what the resolution, the resolution is for city council, but I always try to have it for you so you know what your recommend sort of encapsulates everything. And what's nice is that it gives the stamp of approval on the plan. So now we have a document that says it's gone through the planning commission, it's gone through city council, and it's forever part of our future, hopefully. Much like you, Mark, you did with the Academy Morgantown neighborhood plans and the East Bay. Recommended to council or up or down.
Yep. Well, if there's no other questions regarding this, I recommend this to city council.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to recommend this to council. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Rich is still on mute.
Sorry. Aye.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll I'm not sure whether we'll we can do a memo to council, to kind of accompany the resolution that the planning commission has endorsed.
Okay.
Super.
Thank you all very much. It's been an absolute pleasure working with the city and the county on this effort. And I think you have great opportunities to make great strides in the city.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
Good job.
Jake, before you move on, for those who are watching on the internet and are having issues logging on, if you go to the city's website, I'm going to post the link again. If you could register one more time to come into the meeting, that might solve your issue.
Okay, next up on the agenda, really continuing the business of reviewing and recommending guidelines for short-term rental regulations. I'm going to turn the floor over to Tessa to give folks a kind of an update on where we're at with the entire process and where we're at right now. Part of the meeting exhibits, you seen what is basically a draft of the changes to the zoning ordinance that would capture what the planning commission has kind of discussed so far. And with that, I'll let Tessa take it from there.
Thanks, Jake. Hi, everybody. So as Jake said, since our last meeting, we did make a draft ordinance for the short-term rentals. It's not a final ordinance at all, but we did just want to show you the specific sections of the ordinance that would have to be amended, and in the different sections of those amendments. So I'll go through the document for you, just some of the major highlights, because a lot of the information is still the same from the last time that we had met. So starting with section 1, article 6 would have to be amended with the definition. We did not change this definition from the last time that we had met. It would allow a dwelling unit or just a room or rooms to be rented out as a short-term rental. It would also require, or it would, the owner may or may not be present when renting out a short-term rental. And it would require short-term rentals to be part of the rental licensing program. And then going to B of section 1, we have the zoning districts that would permit short-term rentals, and that has not changed at all. Going over to C, we did have short-term rentals listed as conditional uses in waterfront districts to make it uniform with the rest of the zoning ordinance. And then we also have, as we had short-term rentals as special exceptions in R1 and R1A zoning districts. And then in the middle of page 2, under E, we do have requirements that all short-term rentals in general would have to meet. So again, they would have to register with our residential rental licensing program. They shall not exceed the number of occupants allowed within the applicable zoning district. Overnight occupancy of recreational vehicles, campers, trailers, and tents is prohibited. And neither occupants nor guests are to engage in disorderly conduct or disturb the peace and quiet. And upon notification of such disturbances, the property owner is responsible for preventing a reoccurrence of such conduct. So again, those would be all of the conditions that every short-term rental would have to meet at a minimum. And Jake and I did add more conditions than previously, both for this section as well as the special exception section. With that in mind, we did it intentionally so we can have a discussion and we can either add or subtract from those conditions if you see fit. So going to the next section, we have the conditions for the special exception. That would be in R1 and R1A. We have adequate parking and access must be provided. A screen planting strip shall be provided adjacent to properties in our districts. Any outdoor lighting shall be designed to prevent glare to surrounding properties. No outdoor loudspeakers or sound systems shall be allowed. Operators shall not rent a unit more than 150 cumulative days out of the year. All operators must maintain a guest logbook to include names of guests and dates of stay. The log must be available for inspection by city staff upon request. All advertisements for an approved short-term rental must clearly display the license number issued for that unit. Those last two would help the zoning office administer and enforce the short-term rental regulations. And then we also have a buffering condition. All short-term rentals shall be located at least 600 feet from the nearest property line of any other short-term rental. And finally, they must be owner occupied. So the rental would have to be listed as the property owner's home address. So those were all the updates and changes that we have made since the last time we discussed. Again, we can add or subtract from the conditions, or if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
I guess just to touch on, follow up with what Tessa just described. I mean, the couple of issues that I think there's been agreement on is, basically that, the name of the use, the definition of the use, and essentially the list of zoning districts where the use would be permitted, be listed as a permitted use. And that was, those were things that I think the Planning Commission members had expressed, previous support for. So really, I thought today, we could kind of focus on that, on the conditions section. And if there are things that are perhaps missing or aren't captured, absolutely the way we'd like them to be captured, maybe some of the special exception conditions should, be conditions that we apply to all, and then focus a little bit more on the other conditions for special exceptions. So those are the kind of things I wanted to kind of open up the comments to, and kind of start with the Planning Commission members, and then we do have several people in attendance that I know are very interested in this topic. And what we can do after the Planning Commission members have had some discussion is we can then open the floor up to the public and to accept any public comments previous to what we did, or basically similar to what we did the previous time it was on the agenda. That worked fairly well. So as an attendee, what we'd ask people to do is, if you're interested in making a comment to the commission members, to use that raise hand function through the Zoom meeting, and then basically I'll call people in, one by one, for them to have a register their comments with the Planning Commission members. Looking at the number of people that are here, we'll ask the attendees when we get to that point to limit their comments to a couple minutes, so that everybody gets a chance to say their piece. But first and foremost, I'd like to open it up to the Planning Commission members to kind of discuss that draft, and are we missing anything? Have we captured the conversation to this point? I'll open the floor to the Planning Commission members.
Jake, I was wondering if you could just real quick, for everybody's sake, if you could describe exactly what a special exception is, so that our guests that I'll be speaking shortly will be aware of how we've devised that as kind of a compromise in this situation, realizing that there's two sides to this. We were trying to, I think, as a commission in some of our conversations, kind of find some middle ground. But I think a special exception might not necessarily be a common knowledge for some of our audience what that entails.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there is an additional process involved, approval process that's involved with a special exception. The city solicitor is here on the call. Ed, if you would like to comment on that special exception process, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. A special exception is not special, and it's not an exception. That's the first thing that I think everyone needs to keep in mind. The way I would try to put it in regular words is it is a potential permitted use subject to meeting the criteria that's outlined by the city in a special exception. So what would happen in a permitted use, it's a residential district and I want to put a single family home in my residential district. I'm permitted, I'm allowed to do it. I don't need to go get any special permission. I just get my building permit and move forward. If it's a special exception, then I would have to go to a governmental body. Typically, in this case, it would be the zoning hearing board. And I would have to present my case as to what I'm doing. And I would have to show that I meet the specific criteria that are listed by the city in order to get my permit to move forward. Oftentimes, special exceptions are helpful when you have two different districts abutting each other, or you have something that people may not typically want in a certain area. And it allows the board to hear the case and to render a decision and place any specific requirements in addition to what the city's done to ensure the preservation of the neighborhood and protect the safety of residents and visitors. Does that make sense? Or does anybody have any questions on that?
Nope.
No, thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah, with that being said, I mean, I think that kind of helps to distinguish then between, conditions that apply to that use overall in general. And then, as we mentioned, what kind of additional treating our single family neighborhoods with some extra care, what additional restrictions, if you will, conditions are appropriate in those districts to minimize the impact to the neighborhood. For instance, when you look at number 1 under B for the special exception conditions, even that statement of saying adequate parking must be provided, there are many properties that do not actually have any off-street parking, which is required by the zoning ordinance typically. But if you own property that's an existing dwelling that does not have off-street parking, which the zoning requirement is 1 off-street parking space per dwelling unit, there would be no requirement for you to somehow create that off-street parking space. However, in this case, I think what we're suggesting is that off-street parking does have to be required for R1 and R1A districts in order to have that short-term rental in operation. So that's a for instance of how the standard zoning, this extra condition would apply.
Jake, could you talk about these homeowners associations and what they can do and can't do regarding this?
That's a good point, and again, I think that's another point that it would be helpful if our solicitor weighed in on the role of homeowner associations with regards to these types of issues. My understanding is that homeowners associations have the authority to set up different types of restrictions for that area that could be pretty wide ranging, and that as long as those restrictions are not more permissive than what any municipal regulations entail. In other words, if, let's just say a homeowner association can't permit a use in that area that's not permitted by the zoning ordinance. However, they can reverse that. With that, maybe I can turn it over to Ed, and Ed can elaborate on that.
I think that's accurate. Homeowners associations usually it's a wonderful, everybody's harmonious and in agreement when it's at the start. They create the rules of what they want in the community, and then the property is subdivided, and ultimately you have residential districts. What ends up happening oftentimes, and so those homeowners association rules are enforceable to the extent they're lawful and they're perhaps equal or more restrictive than the governing rules of the municipality. A good example would be swimming pools or fences. A lot of municipalities don't have significant regulations on fences or swimming pools, but many homeowners associations do have rules. You can't have a pool, or you have to have certain specific type of fencing. It has to be decorative. And so you'll see that a lot where there's greater restrictions in a homeowners association regarding something like pools or fences, and maybe even colors of houses. When you run into trouble is when you're trying to change the rules of the homeowners association. The city doesn't have any preference. We don't care. We're not going to regulate that. But if I'm a property owner in a homeowners association, I have to get enough votes under that homeowners association bylaws to change the rules. Typically, it's more than a majority. It's a supermajority. And what that percentage is for any given homeowners association, it can vary. But you may well need to have something along the lines of 75% of the homeowners have to agree to impose a new restriction on the homeowners.
Thank you, Ed.
I'd like to just point out one more thing. I was looking at the zoning map, and there's a lot of yellow for R1 on the map. And a lot of our attendees today seem to be from one small section of that yellow on the map. So we have to make decisions broadly that take into account everybody's opinions, not just one corner of the city. That's all I have to say on that.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any initial comments regarding the conditions that have been outlined? You've had a chance to look this over a little bit, and I don't know whether anything else has come to mind. Like I said, maybe there are some of these conditions that we've gotten a special exception that should apply to all, for instance. And you know, we don't have to make that final decision today, but I wanted to put that out there and kind of stress that you know, we want to try and get that right and make that as complete, inclusive as possible, and you know, something that makes sense. So I guess what I'm hoping is that you know, you can take some additional time and kind of look at that, and that's really the key piece of the draft changes that's, you know, we're just looking to finalize before we would then say, here's our final draft and these are our recommendations to council. Any other planning commission input at this point before I open the floor up to hear some of the public comment? If not, I see several people that do have their hands raised. I'm just basically going to call on them in the order that that I see here on my screen. First up is Susan Morse.
Thank you, Jake. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to thank you and the commission for the thoughtfulness that went through the ordinance or the draft. It was, as you say, trying to meet halfway and make it good for the city. You know, it's not perfect for everybody, but I thought it was good. So thank you. I think the owner occupied, these are just thoughts, you know, does help to keep the integrity of the neighborhood with the property being well maintained. I wanted to say that the 150 days to monitor that is really easy. in case any of you wanted to know, because I am a host, you get a calendar that shows you how many days and even the money that you make. I mean, if somebody, they're not going, like say for instance, Airbnb or VRBO would not let you into the owner's site, but the owner could print that out in 2 seconds. So that's a very easy thing to monitor. And I don't know if you guys do this, but in social media, whether it's Facebook, Nextdoor, Instagram, I've noticed that the input has been 80 to 85% extremely positive with Airbnbs and their use in the city and in the R1s. Again, I know that just like at this meeting, there's a handful of people that, you know, just don't want the rentals. But throughout those that R1, I have seen, you know, a wonderful input. So that was all I had. I thought it was great. It was positive. That's all I have.
Thank you, Susan. Next up, we have Lucinda.
Okay, I hit the unmute. Did it work? Okay.
Yes.
I do just want to thank the commission, the city solicitor, city council, the zoning board for putting a very important issue on the table for short-term rentals. Every city is different. What works in one city might not work in another. Communities need to create rules that are very much tailored to what makes sense for them. And certainly accountability on the homeowners is very, very important. The benefits that we have said before to the city of Erie is tremendous, as well as to the property owner and people who have short-term rentals that rely on this for income. The Airbnb that we operate, we do not rely on it for our income. What I personally do rely on it for is the joy and pleasure that it has brought to many, many more people than it has made unhappy. Short-term rentals, they should not be a yes or a no issue, rather one of compromise and reaching community goals. Decisions made must be fair and just for everyone, not just, as Mr. Razorik said, one little corner of the city. The city of Erie, R1, is a huge, huge population. And a lot of our short-term rentals are in those R1 areas, not just a handful. Like I said, it needs to be just for all citizens and homeowners. So that's about all I have to say. I really do appreciate the ordinance. I think, or the draft of it, I think it is very fair. It has looked like it is a compromise for everyone to be happy. And I don't think that, I will make one other comment, is that any negative or untruths that have been said, I don't think that all the positive that has come out of this short-term rental that's in question here in the forefront, I don't think that should be undercut by some disgruntled people. This operation, again, the one that's in question here, has been in operation for 4 years. Never once, and I have proof and data of that, have there ever been any complaints, any disruption, any police calls. It has been just a sure pleasure and delight for many people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucinda. Next up, we have Jessica.
Hello. I'm Jessica Haran Kunso. You might have recalled I spent 12 years serving on Erie City Council, so thank you for letting me speak with you today. Zoning was always a big interest of mine when I served on council. I participated in the comprehensive rewrite in 2005 and worked on many of the amendments and things that came before council during that time. You've been asked to study this very different issue with short-term rentals and where they fit into our community. I'm sure you've evaluated many models that exist in other communities. But as a student of the City of Erie zoning ordinance, the proposed amendment before you seems a little bit extreme to me. Although our ordinance doesn't specifically speak to short-term rentals, it does address the issue under definition of dwellings. If you look at your book under dwellings, that they specify that dwellings are not to be used for transient purposes, i.e. hotel, motel, or other transient uses as defined in the ordinance as a stay in the city for less than 30 days. So this proposal would allow transients to reside basically in any dwelling throughout the city of Erie. So I'm just questioning the point of having residential zoning classifications if we allow short-term uses in every jurisdiction. But before you make your decision, I do want to just draw you back to some important facts about the zoning ordinance for your consideration in making this kind of decision or modifying your proposal. At the beginning of the zoning ordinance on page 2, section 108 is what's called a statement of community development objectives. This statement sets forth the policy goals of this ordinance. And in that section, you'll find the very first goal of the zoning ordinance is to set aside land for residential, commercial, manufacturing, and waterfront uses in the Erie City, along with appropriate transitional districts so developed land in Erie can exist in a compatible and harmonious way. I draw your attention to those last 4 words. Compatible and harmonious way. I'm certain that the R1 single family neighborhood residents would not agree that you'd be fulfilling this first objective by recommending short-term rentals be allowed. They would be neither compatible with the small, very small use of allowed uses in R1, churches, cemeteries, childcare, single family dwellings. And harmonious couldn't be described as a 3-year court battle with appeals and with rulings on the side of the neighborhood. The concept of compatible and harmonious should be considered very careful when considering zoning amendments. Additionally, it seems that we have overlooked the first goal of the ordinance that points out for appropriate transitional districts between areas. This proposal that you have before you would not have any transitions between districts. Another goal of the ordinance from this statement is to preserve, protect, and improve residential neighborhoods. That's right in the front cover of your inside of your zoning book. Certainly allowing transient rentals does not achieve preservation, protection, and improvement of neighborhoods. Glenwood is not targeted by any comprehensive plan or the Erie Refocused as a neighborhood in need of improvement. As a matter of fact, the Erie Refocused plan speaks quite specifically about the need to protect single-family neighborhoods to ensure that their residents continue to invest and reside in the city of Erie and not to abandon Erie for the suburbs. One of the most clear and most well-documented causes for neighborhood decline is the absence of owner-occupied homes. Airbnb neighbors are quintessentially absentee landlords. Ask the land bank what the primary cause of blight is. Making these amendments would most definitely do the opposite of preserving, protecting, and improving single-family neighborhoods. Absenteeism is the key decline of neighborhoods. Also, as you should have noticed in the testimony you've heard on this issue, not one proponent that is speaking in favor of allowing these short-term rentals in an R1 is a permanent resident of one of these neighborhoods who does not own or operate all or part of their homes as Airbnb. I've served for 12 years on city council. I was charged with representing the whole entire city of Erie. And the folks that are speaking to you today are not from the whole entire city of Erie. They're from the neighborhoods or the neighborhood of Glenwood or folks that own or operate Airbnbs. The other last goal of the ordinance I'd like to draw your attention to is that it is to promote the constant renewal of Erie City without encouraging incompatible land use. So right in there, you are not supposed to encourage incompatible land uses. Yes, we want to revitalize the city of Erie, but not as incompatible. As I'm sure you're aware, there's 17 zoning districts in the city of Erie, with R1 being the strictest zoning district with the fewest allowed uses that are directly, usually those related to the support of single families that are those uses that are allowed. In this proposal, you have 7 areas you'd be permitting it and 2 special exception areas. I don't believe that short-term rentals should be prohibited throughout our great city. Instead, I believe they should be placed in harmonious and compatible areas and assure for appropriate transitional districts. I'd recommend you reject this proposal, as it doesn't meet the intent of the zoning ordinance in general. Even permitting the short-term rentals as special exception leaves the decision-making power of what we want for our city, what our city leadership and our planning departments want for our city, in the hands of a zoning hearing board. It takes that role away from the elected officials, rather than having them drive the decision-making for the city. Personally, I think Airbnb patrons would be better served in areas with nearby amenities, things they could do, restaurants, theaters, bars, beaches, entertainment venues, other than a quiet single-family neighborhood where their presence provides no benefit to the neighbors that live there all year round, only to the homeowner that receives their rent. I appreciate all you do for the city, and I hope to help you to understand the impact your decision would have, not only on one neighborhood, but on the entire city of Erie. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Next up, and just, I guess, before we go on, I know that Jessica covered a lot of ground there, and in the interest of, there are several people wanting to speak. If if you're going to echo the same comments, that's fine. Just let us know that that you're agreeing with some of those other comments without reiterating them and repeating them. Next up, we have Theodore.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to comment on something that was said by Ed Betza. I live in Glenwood, and Glenwood has restrictions. One of the restrictions is that the property shall be used for private residence purposes only. So that excludes any other type of use other than that. Secondly, I would say that, and I know that Mr. Betza disagrees with me, but the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has determined that you cannot have Airbnbs or short-term rentals in single-family districts. Also, I'd like to point out that neither Mrs. Morse or Mrs. Maurer, Lucinda and Susan, are residents of the city of Erie. None of them are. Mrs. Morse resides in Florida. That's her full-time residence. That would disqualify her even under the proposed amendments to the ordinance. There was also a comment by Mrs. Morse that on other types of media, such as next door neighbor, that people are overwhelmingly supportive of having Airbnbs. Well, I'll tell you, I reviewed the Airbnbs for the greater Colquitt area, Frontier area, and the Lower East Side, and they are manifestly opposed to this. Mrs. Maurer has also made a statement which is incorrect, which is that there have been no complaints. police calls are disruptions. As a matter of fact, as Mr. Jake Welsh would have to admit, part of the first hearing that we had in 2017 with regards to this issue, there were numerous complaints and numerous police calls and numerous parties. And this has gone on for, even at Mrs. Mauer's house, where they had a graduation party. They had a group of people who had boats, trailers, and other paraphernalia in the street, contrary to the city regulations, and the police had to be called to get them off the street. Next question, or actually I have a number of questions, which I'd want you to consider. Why do you need to have Airbnbs in single family neighborhoods? I mean, I've looked over the ordinance, and it seems like without single family neighborhoods, there is a number of places you can put Airbnbs. I know it's been sold to you that Airbnbs are the next best thing to sliced bread and it's progressive. However, there's no reason actually to have them there. They're supposed to be for tourists. That's where they should be. They should be in the same manner as hotels, motels, and everything else. I don't know who's in charge of regulating Airbnbs right now, but I have not seen any regulation whatsoever from the city with regards to Airbnbs. So I don't know who's responsible, but whoever it is, I haven't seen them do anything. The law as it is now would shut down as Miss Morse's property, which was the subject of a lawsuit, which she lost, and there was a verdict in her failure that she was in violation of the city ordinance. Nothing's ever happened. There is another Airbnb in my neighborhood where an individual is not only operating an Airbnb, but they have had a party, at least one party that I know of, with a bunch of hockey players and loud noise, etc. And they also are operating a business out of that. That's the RLB studio, which is being operated at that, which I believe is not allowed. You're not allowed to operate a business in a single family neighborhood.
Mr. Eli?
Yes.
Mr. Eli, your 5 minutes is up. Let's allow some time for other speakers. Thank you.
I think other speakers had more time, but
no.
And well, that's not the case, but and anybody can certainly submit any written comments that I will be happy to forward to the Planning Commission members. You can submit any comments to zoning@erie.pa.us. I know that there's lots to be said, and 5 minutes is not a lot of time, but you know, we want to make sure everybody is heard today. Thank you. Michael Sullivan?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, everybody can hear me. Thank you. Thank you again for the time. Yes, a number of points have been brought up that I was going to suggest. Michael Sullivan, my wife Karen Sullivan, and we reside on Upland Drive, and as we call it, we live across the street from the Morse Motel. I've had 40 years in business, and I'm currently the executive director of the Prescott Lighthouse. I wanted to focus on a couple things regarding the Erie refocus, the report that was done a few years ago. The number one point in that was the stability of our neighborhoods and the value of our properties in those neighborhoods. It's the same thing the EDDC right now is doing downtown, stabilizing neighborhoods. It's the same thing Tom Hagen is doing on 6th Street. And I don't see how, for the life of me, any of you can agree allowing motels. That's what Airbnbs are. Karen and I've stayed in them all across the country. I've never stayed in one in an R1 neighborhood. It's always been downtown, etc., somewhere. But no one ever, whatever comes out of this, can help to explain to me how a motel to me is people coming and going all hours of the day and night, paying the owners, etc., how that can add value to a neighborhood. No one will ever be able to explain that to me. What I would agree with is that they're taking value away from me. I have worked all my life to live in a beautiful neighborhood. If I wanted to live where motels are, I could live on Upper Peach Street. I could live out on West 8th Street and live across from the Park Plaza. I chose not to do that. These R1 neighborhoods pay the highest taxes in the city. Again, you're jeopardizing that. Also want to see the report. I'm sure all of you have seen the earnings report from Erie Insurance that just came out. We could have a quick test and see, but it was 49%. Their earnings were 50% higher than last year. That would scare the daylights out of me if I was in city government. What that means to me is Tim Nicastro and his gang down there had 50% increase in earnings, and they didn't have a soul in those buildings for 10 months. They could have Erie Insurance anywhere in the country. San Francisco, big article in Sunday's New York Times, is becoming a ghost town. The tech beat people out there realize these people do not have to be in the buildings. I happen to know, and actually a few of the higher ups are on my board at the Lighthouse. It is very, very difficult for them to attract and keep top talent in Erie, Pennsylvania. One of the things they look for, as you know, is keeping him in Erie. Again, i.e. Tom Hagen. They do not want to come to neighborhoods with Airbnbs and motels. They have told these people that. These are top caliber people, guys. They want the best. And when people are coming and going in driveways with their bass boats and everything else at 1 o'clock in the morning, again, they're on vacation. Good for them. But it doesn't fit in an R1 neighborhood. This is not how you attract top talent to your insurance. I know it's a segue, but these are the things that a company like Erie Insurance looks for. I think it's very important. And again, the whole focus of the Erie Refocus report was stability in our neighborhoods, which Jessica brought up. I'll end quickly. One of the things I wanted to bring up was the last meeting, one of the Morses brought up the idea of racism in Glenwood. That touched a real raw nerve with me. I'm tired of people spewing things out and people aren't correcting them. Mrs. Morse may or may not know that her next door neighbor was Mrs. Snow. Her husband was Dr. Snow. Very prominent African-American family. Their son, Dr. Tony Snow, of course, a lot of you might know from downtown. We have Jewish people up here. We have Indians, and we have a number of African-American families. And as I kid my wife, they even let the Irish in. There is not a racism problem here. And I thought that was a very, very underhanded and low blow thing to say. I just wanted to get that out. Also, the idea that their Airbnbs in Glenwood bring people into Erie. I absolutely disregard that. If anybody believes that somebody's going to miss their son or daughter's graduation over at Mercier's because they can't stay on Upland Drive, I think it's again ludicrous. So again, somebody has to explain to me how motels, don't call them short-term rentals, they're motels, how that can add value or stability to a neighborhood. I don't get it. You know, folks, the neighborhood, we as private citizens, taxpayers, again, probably highest taxpayers in the city, has spent thousands of dollars defending the integrity of the R1 neighborhood. And trust me, we will continue to fight it. We thought it was settled with a slice of life in the state Supreme Court decision. Nothing has happened since then. I didn't realize you could disregard state Supreme Court decisions. The sad part is that the fight has not been against the Morrises, although they are the root cause of this. The fight and expense has been with our own city government. That's the problem, for not doing their job in enforcing the existing zoning laws and upholding the state Supreme Court decision, slice of life. We ask you, R1 neighbors all across the city, that you do your job, uphold the law mandated this by the state Supreme Court, and enforce the zoning laws already on the books. You know, you talk about all the different plans, and Tess, I appreciate all the work you have in this. You talk about the different, directives and stuff, but the slice of life has been out for over 2 years. And the Airbnb still continue. No one has ever enforced them. How are we supposed to think that any of these other new suggestions would be enforced? I just don't see it. Again, I appreciate the time, and thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you. Mr. Mokris?
Afternoon, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Gary Mokris. Thank you for allowing me some time to speak. I'll be very brief and try not to regurgitate what a lot of other members of my neighborhood have already stated. So I just wanted, I think it's very clear that you're fairly aware of our position. I'm the president of the Glenwood Association, by the way, and I'm tasked with the plan of representing our neighborhood. And mostly, we're of the understanding that ordinances are to benefit the many, right? Not the few. So I took to heart what was recently stated at a city council member by some members quoted Lisa Austin when they were talking about the Bayfront connector, how we need to listen to the people, right? So we formulated a campaign, and Mr. Welsh, I'm not sure, I have a signature verification that you received, a package I sent with over 183 signatures from our neighborhood. It was received last Tuesday. There were notices to the Planning Commission with over 183 signatures from current members of our neighborhood that own property either jointly or severally. And it was said to be signed by you with the UPS verification. So I'm hopeful you received that and was able to pass that along to the Planning Commission prior to today's meeting.
It was passed on, yes.
Okay, very good, thank you. And we were hopeful that that made an impact, that the people's voices, if they could not be on today's meeting, were at least expressed. And that's not just a small few that happened to agree or this is 183 proper signatures of homeowners, property owners in our neighborhood. And so I just ask that you consider this current amendment to the zoning ordinance, which already will include R2, R3, RLB, C1, C2, C3, waterfront. This is many districts in our city. And it should be a significant amendment in its own. So that way, single family property owners that want to live in a stable neighborhood such as ours would have that. And if you want to run a short-term rental, there are plenty of options throughout our city. So I thank you for your time. Have a great day. And thank you for your hard work on this project.
Thank you, Gary. Ben Henry?
Yes, thank you. Everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna quickly ask I think, two questions to you, Tessa. The one thing in particular jumped out at me, and I believe, if I'm reading this correctly, this is just for R1, but I think it's number 9, must be owner occupied. And So my first question is that correct that that rule would be only for R1?
Yeah, it would be for R1 and R1A zoning districts.
Okay. And can you explain what the logic or thought behind shall be located at least 600 feet from the nearest property line of any other short-term rental?
Sure. The logic behind that was so it would space short-term rentals out, and it would prevent them from essentially taking over a neighborhood. It would be like a buffer zone that is fairly common in zoning ordinances with different types of land uses.
Okay. Yeah. You know, the reason that jumped out at me is because I have 2 Airbnbs in a waterfront neighborhood and they're right next to each other. So at first I was thinking, obviously that would be a violation, but it's not an R1 or R1A, so that wouldn't be a problem. But just something to keep in mind. And the owner occupied thing, I think is right in its intention, but maybe something to consider more. Again, because it's for the R1, I think that makes sense, but there certainly are plenty of Airbnbs that are not, or short-term rentals that are not owner occupied. Those are really my only comments about the actual ordinance changes here. I just wanted to try to address a couple things that were said. First of all, the comment about racism in the Glenwood neighborhood was not saying that people are currently acting in a racist way. It was highlighting that HOAs 40, 50 years ago or more were originally used in racist ways, and that they were originally used to discriminate against people that they did not want in their neighborhoods. I know this because my family, when we moved into Glenwood, they still had in the rules something about Jewish families not being allowed, and we had to address that with the homeowners association. So they were not accusing anyone currently of doing that. They were just bringing up the history of HOAs. Next, I think a very important question that was brought up is, what is the added value to having Airbnbs in a neighborhood? Claudine put a comment in the chat, and I agree with her. And this is my stance on the issue, having 4 Airbnbs myself. I can make the most money in compared to any other normal renting scenario or leasing scenario. I can bring in the most revenue with Airbnb. And what does that mean in terms of neighborhoods? It means that I can further take care of the property more quickly and better than I have ever been able to do in any other scenario. And that is why owners are choosing to go the route of Airbnb and short-term rentals. So in other words, to object to short-term rentals on the basis of detracting value is purely not understanding Airbnb and short-term rentals. If you are bringing in more money, it is not translating, I think 99% of the time. There may be outliers in every case, but 99% of the time, it means that the homeowner is better taking care of the property. They're furnishing it nicer, they're landscaping it better, all those sorts of things that if you were to be leasing to a 12-month standard tenant, they are much more concerned with paying the least amount, which translates to the onus being on the tenant or it just not getting done. So I hope that is clear in that Airbnbs are likely to drive property values up because these properties are going to be better taken care of and look more presentable in every case. Another comment that was made was trying to move backwards on us referring to this issue as short-term rentals. I had made the point in the beginning of these discussions that we have to have a specific term for this use because it is not hotel use. That is a different business model. It is a different, structure. I can't think of a single motel that has 1 unit or 2 units. They don't exist. They are always 5, 10, 15, 20 units. And that's what makes them a motel. If you are renting a single family home, that is what makes it different from motels. It is a short-term rental. Just so we're clear on that, I find that very frustrating when they're really trying to undo the work that you guys have done.
Mr. Henry?
Yeah.
Mr. Henry, you've exceeded your time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Claudine?
I have unmuted. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
My name is Claudine Thiem, and I have a Airbnb. Actually, I'm still trying to find out what its actual R classification is, so I can't even tell you if I'm in an R1 or not. I'm still trying to find that out. But I had said, as Benjamin referred to in the notes, that I had acquired this property and immediately dumped in about 30% of the property value to improve it. It had been a long-term rental property for years before I bought it. And I can tell you it was not well maintained. And it is definitely an improvement to the neighborhood. And I personally speak with all of my neighbors, and they text me if they see anything, and I have notified the immediate neighbors. I think some of that due diligence could be considered in the ordinance. And I feel that tourists and plans that we're trying to get people to come to Erie, that it is short-sighted to think that people that want to visit a city want to congregate or stay in those supposedly recreational areas. I travel all over the country and stay in Airbnbs, and I purposefully stay in R1 districts. I do not want to be where the hotels and motels and things are. And that's a majority of the people that I travel with are the same way. So from my perspective, I feel like I'm all for regulations and for homeowners associations in neighborhoods to be able to make their own policies. However, I feel that in the R1 proposed things, that both the owner occupied number 9 and also number 5, where you can only rent it for 150 days a year, is very restrictive from a business standpoint. I'm a local business owner, and my store was closed for 56 days, and Airbnb got me through. That's all.
Thank you, Claudine. Joe Hanks?
Yes. Hello. Good afternoon. I am a supporter of Airbnbs, and I would just like to make some points out. As Claudine said, I go to different cities in US and Canada and prefer to be in a quiet neighborhood, not a busy, trafficked business district. Airbnb owners are screened before they can lease out, if that's the word we want to use, and I am also screened before I can use them. And I find them very cost effective, and I'm in a more home-like atmosphere than being in a one-room hotel room. And that's all I have to say, but they're great. I stay in them all over US, Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Whipple?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for, excuse me, allowing me to speak. I do not live in the city of Erie. I grew up in the city of Erie, and I have watched the city decline over the years. I find that what the city is doing now, moving forward in a positive direction, is absolutely fantastic. Airbnb should be a part of that. Airbnbs attract, excuse me, travelers, vacationers, returning families, doctors, professors, clergy. The list is endless. And as mentioned before, not everyone wants to stay where the bars are. They want to stay in a nice, quiet neighborhood, which is what has happened with the Airbnb in question on Upland Drive in Erie. I have been involved with that process on Upland Drive for the last 4 years. That neighborhood has not changed one bit. The house has been maintained. The people that have stayed in that Airbnb have been very respectful of the house and the neighborhood. We have not, as had mentioned before, prior, and I'm sorry, I don't recall who it was. I believe it was Mr. Eli or Ely. I'm sorry about the pronunciation. We have not had one single complaint from a neighbor, from the police, from anyone. The people that have stayed there have been absolutely wonderful, and they have come for a variety of reasons. I think that the city is finally moving ahead in a progressive manner, and I feel that we should not stand in the progress of moving ahead with guidelines for Airbnb and short-term rentals. To me, by doing that is selfish and it benefits no one, where we should be looking to benefit the city of Erie with whatever is needed to increase that. We've seen people move out of the city. We should be looking to lure people to the city as not only a vacation place, but a place to live. And a small portion of the city should not have a huge effect on the guidelines that should be put in place for short-term rentals. I appreciate you allowing me the time to speak, and I thank you for the direction that it looks like the city is finally moving ahead in a progressive manner with regard to the Airbnb issue.
Thank you, Kathy. Mr. Whaley?
Hi, thank you. Just so you know, I've been sitting in my car for 1 hour and 42 minutes and I've been cut off twice. I appreciate all you folks that are on this board. I see some new faces. Thank you. So I'll do 3 minutes. My first overarching concern, why the rush and focus to change R1 listings? Ms. Kunso was perfect in her analysis of the zoning. I've lived in Erie on and off most of my life. And at one point, the city council made a new rule down on the waterfront that no building could be above 55 feet tall. Every single building that's been built down there is taller than 55 feet. They always get an exemption. So I was in the last 2 Zoom meetings and you tabled it in the last month. And now when you come back, you've already got an ordinance written. I can't believe that. So a couple questions. In the special exemptions, you talk about off-street parking. So on the Upland Drive property, that'd be stacked in the driveway. And if you're a business, that's not how your parking works. So if they're allowed to have 4 cars, shouldn't they have 4 parking spots? And that's not stacked in a driveway. That would be that wouldn't be the wrong use, I think. I got some disjointed notes. Erie Refocused specifically calls out Glenwood and Frontier as the two strongest areas and says to do anything you can to keep it strong. I've been against these short-term rentals from the beginning, and I don't see how it helps my property value to have, I'll use the word motel, on my street. I paid $250,000 for my house. Depending on what listing you look at, 14 years later, it's worth about the same. Just being in Erie is a penalty, but now having rentals on my block is not going to help me. Ben talked about, he said he runs a bed and breakfast. He doesn't run a motel. Well, in the city zoning codes, there are bed and breakfasts, and there are rules. You must have a sign in front of your property. You must have off-street parking for all of the rooms. So Airbnb is literally a bed and breakfast. So are you going to mandate signage in front of these houses in residential districts? I'm curious as to how Airbnb is not a bed and breakfast that you've already got taken care of. Your group is fully in charge, and you want historic districts where shingles and siding are going to be regulated and mandated and to keep the integrity of the neighborhood. So the connection I make there is you're dying to keep 6th Street historic, and you want all the buildings to look good, but you want a short-term rental on my block next door to where an 8-year-old kid lives. It doesn't make any sense. You're worried about shingles, but not safety. And so now, and I couldn't get off my phone, I wanted to look up this. If you do a Google search, you will find hundreds of cities across America who have regulations of where you can and cannot have Airbnb. You can find them. They're all there. Why do we want to allow them everywhere? I'd love someone to be able to answer that question. So 2 points. Now that these are commercial properties and they're a business, as many people have said, and they make money, and it's kept one lady in business. Little things like the garbage. So if you're a commercial business in the city of Erie, you must have commercial dumpsters. You cannot use city garbage. So am I to assume now that these commercial properties, why would they be allowed to have guests, 4, 5, 8 people in, create a lot of garbage, and it go into the one price fits all residential garbage fee? That's not fair. That's an externality that puts stress on city services. We don't need that. And then lastly, again, I do appreciate all your hard work. The irony that the last 3 callers have exemplified is mind-boggling. The listing for the Airbnb on my street broadly proclaims they're in a quiet, safe neighborhood. The last 3 callers said they love being in quiet, safe neighborhoods. Well, that's why I spent $250,000 to buy a house in a quiet, safe neighborhood. I do not want people parking on the street, people in and out. I know for a fact, because I have 2 kids that go to Gannon, that the property on Upland has been used multiple times for parties where there's more than 30 people. Multiple times. Because my kids have been there. So, all things being equal, I don't want it. I don't think it belongs. There's 16 districts where you can allow bed and breakfasts. No, actually not. A bed and breakfast is excluded in 6 of the zonings you have now. So, thank you. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. One thing as a point of reference that was brought up about the number of occupants, potentially the number of occupants in a short-term rental, one of the conditions that applies to any short-term rental applies to any dwelling as well, is there is an occupancy limit. So a dwelling unit should not be occupied by more than one family. That was something that was discussed previously about, this. I don't think we were envisioning a large house that would be rented to 3 or 4 families at a time. And so number 2, under the conditions that apply to all short-term rentals, does involve the number of occupants, and it is limited to what the zoning district limits it to. So a dwelling is limited to be occupied by one family at a time, just as a point of clarification. I think that's it for the members of the attendees that had raised their hand wanting to be heard. Do we have any other comments? I don't see any other folks. Let's bring Lucinda back in. It looks like there might have been somebody else on her line, perhaps, that wanted to be heard. So Lucinda, I'm bringing you back in. We'll see if we have an additional comment. Folks that have already spoken, I appreciate your comments. Thank you for taking the time to attend and address the Planning Commission.
Jake, I have a question for you.
Yes.
The comments that are typed in, I'm only seeing just a brief description. Are those able to be printed out?
As far as the chat comments,
yeah, because I couldn't read them all, and I
know.
want to read them.
Yeah, I do not know.
Okay, let me know.
Frankly, I mean,
Frank can usually maintain those. I'll make sure he usually keeps those as part of the webinar. I'm sorry, were you asking about the chat room?
Yes.
Mark?
The chat room.
Because I'm seeing them come at the bottom, but I'm only seeing a snippet of it. I want to read them. I want to read them. I mean, not at this moment, but.
Right. Yeah, and again, I mean, obviously, what we're looking at is regulations that apply to all, and not necessarily disagreement over how one particular property's been operated in the past. We're looking at moving, what are we going to be doing moving forward? So, I mean, I'll just throw that out there. So we'll check about that, about getting the chats captured and to get out to folks.
I just texted him too, Jake, just to make sure he was, because I'm sure he's on another meeting by now that's not listening to us right now.
Yeah. Right. Okay. If need be, I can kind of stay on the, after we adjourn, I can kind of stay, leave the meeting open, just to see if we get some info from Frank on the chat.
Jake,
Yes.
Can you hear me? Dare I ever
Yes.
make an IT suggestion? But you're recording this session. I wonder if you can share your screen and pull up the chats, and then that way they would be visible and they would be recorded.
Yep.
I don't think you have to do that now, but at the end, I think you can pull up the chat. And I see it. I see a number of chats, at least since I last looked, there's 24 new ones. But if you haven't been checking them, you can pull it up and it'll be recorded on the device. I
Hey,
think.
Jake, I've already saved the chats. There's an option in Zoom where it just lets you do that. So I have those. I
Okay,
also took
super.
screenshots of the Q&A because the Q&A does not save.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Thank you. Okay. Any other comments on this item? If not, we can move on to the next item, which is the 2021 City Planning Commission priorities. I did want to open the floor to Kathy to discuss that with the commission members.
Sure. Well,
Kathy, it's all yours.
thank you, Jake. In the interest of time, I would suggest moving this to our meeting in February. We have plenty of time to discuss priorities. Gives you an opportunity to review them. You've got a lot of information you've had to deal with the past 2 hours. So unless anyone has any objections, I would move this until the February meeting, and we can maybe take it up at the beginning of the meeting before we're all a little wiped out from so much public input. I will thank Erin Carey. She's been with us since the beginning. She was on this call for this particular item, but she's also a resident of the city, and it's always good to get a little experience with the civic mindedness of our residents. So I thank her for being on the call for the past 2 hours, but I think we'll just pass this along to February.
Yep.
Sounds like a great idea to me.
And that's the only other comment I'll add is that's I'm going to be working on the 2020 annual report for the Planning Commission. And as we've kind of done over the last couple of years, we've sort of thrown our upcoming year priorities into that report. So this will be folded into that, and we can certainly finalize that at the February meeting.
Jake, did you put out an email saying our February meeting was canceled?
No.
Wow, I saw that come across my email last week, but okay.
No, we should be in good shape for February.
All right, sounds good.
With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All right, thank you all. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.
All right, good.
Thanks, Jake.
See ya.
Thank you, everyone.
Tessa, can you hear? Oh.